You checked a map this morning without thinking about it. Maybe you didn't even open one. Your phone just knew where you were and where you were going. Getting anywhere on this planet today is basically a solved problem. For most of human history, it wasn't. It was the hardest problem there was. And yet somehow, with nothing but legs, logs, and stubbornness, humans ended up everywhere. Every continent except Antarctica. Every climate. Islands so remote that finding them at all seems less like navigation and more like a rounding error in the universe's favor. This is the story of how that actually happened. Not with engines, not with satellites, but with feet, raft, and an apparently bottomless appetite for finding out what's over the next hill. Let's start with the part almost nobody thinks about. Before any of this, before boats, before horses, before the wheel, humans had to become good at the single most boring form of transportation there is, walking. Except we're not actually good walkers in the way you'd expect. Put a human against a cheetah, and it isn't close. Put a human against a horse over a mile, and the horse wins easily. Where humans dominate is a category that barely gets discussed. A person in reasonable shape can cover 20 miles in a day, sleep, and do it again and again for weeks. Almost nothing else on land can do that. And the reason is bizarre once you look at it. Human feet work like natural springs. Every step returns a little energy back into the next one. Our bodies cool themselves by sweating, letting us keep moving long after most animals would overheat. We weren't built to be the fastest. We were built to simply never stop. The oldest confirmed evidence of that upright walk comes from Tanzania, where a set of footprints was found pressed into hardened volcanic ash. Two individuals walking side by side, dated to roughly 3.6 million years ago. Look at those prints today, and they're unmistakably familiar. Toes, arch, heel. That gait belonged to something recognizably like us. Millions of years before anything we'd call a modern human existed. For an almost incomprehensible stretch of time, walking was the entire transportation system humanity had, and it still managed to spread an early human relative called Homo erectus out of Africa and across a huge swath of Asia roughly 2 million years ago. A smaller-brained, thicker-boned cousin of ours that nonetheless did something no primate before it had ever done. It left and it kept leaving, generation after generation, one valley at a time, following animals, following rivers, following whatever thin thread of curiosity pulls a species toward a horizon it can't yet see. When our own species eventually made a similar exit from Africa, somewhere around 60,000 to 70,000 years ago, genetics suggests it may have involved a surprisingly small founding group. In some estimates, just a few thousand people funneling out through what's now the Middle East. Nearly everyone alive outside Africa today traces back through that narrow opening. It is an uncomfortable thought if you sit with it. A drought, a disease outbreak, one particularly bad season, and that thread snaps. You simply don't exist. But walking, no matter how impressive, has an obvious enemy: water. For most of human history, a river or a coastline functioned like a wall. You found a shallow place to wade across, or you didn't cross at all. And then, somewhere along the way, humans figured out something genuinely strange for a land animal: how to cross water on purpose, not by accident, not by clinging to driftwood in a panic, but with intent. The evidence for this shows up in an unlikely place. On the Indonesian island of Flores, archaeologists found stone tools roughly 800,000 years old. The problem is that Flores has never, at any point, even during the driest ice age with the lowest sea levels imaginable, been connected to the mainland by land. There was always open water in between, a minimum of several miles, which means whatever left those tools there had to get across somehow. Nobody knows exactly what the first vessel looked like. Wood rot, reeds decompose, whatever it was is long gone. But the tools stayed, and the tools don't lie. But then humans did something far more unbelievable. They sailed toward land they couldn't even see. Somewhere between 65,000 and 50,000 years ago, people left Southeast Asia and reached what is now Australia and New Guinea, somewhere around 65,000 years ago. This wasn't a short hop with land visible the whole way. At the narrowest points, the water was still wide enough that you could not see the destination from where you started. You would have had to leave the coast behind entirely, lose sight of everything familiar, and trust that something existed on the other side of empty ocean. Archaeological sites in northern Australia have pushed the date of human arrival there back to roughly 65,000 years, sometimes debated closer to 50,000. But either way, the conclusion holds. This happened before agriculture, before cities, before anything resembling writing. Someone built something that could float, pointed it at nothing, and went anyway. That impulse, leave, cross, see what's there, never really stopped showing up. It just kept getting more ambitious. Roughly 3,000 years ago, the ancestors of the people we now call Polynesians began pushing out from islands near New Guinea into the open Pacific, an ocean that covers close to a third of the entire surface of the planet. And scattered across that ocean were not convenient chains of islands you could hop between, with land always in view. They were specks: Tonga, Samoa. Then, further and further out, Hawaii, Easter Island, among the most isolated inhabited places anywhere on Earth. New Zealand reached astonishingly late, only around 700 to 800 years ago, meaning cathedrals were already standing in Europe while humans were, for the very first time, stepping onto brand new land in the South Pacific. They did this in double-hulled canoes, lashed together with cord, powered by woven sails, carrying not just people, but food, water, plants, and animals across thousands of miles of open water. And the boats, remarkably, aren't even the most impressive part. The navigation is. No compass, no sextant, no written charts. Navigators held an entire star compass in memory, the rising and setting points of specific stars in sequence, night after night. They read the rhythm of ocean swells, sometimes felt directly through the hull of the canoe. They watched the flight patterns of birds that sleep on land but fish at sea, using them as living compass needles. They read the color of the water and the shape of clouds that tend to gather invisibly above islands still below the horizon. All of it held in the mind, passed down by voice and by doing, refined across generations, until a navigator could leave one island, sail out of sight of any land at all for days, and arrive at a target only a few miles wide in the middle of the largest ocean on the planet. In the 20th century, when skeptics doubted this level of precision was ever real, researchers rebuilt a traditional voyaging canoe and sailed it from Hawaii to Tahiti using nothing but these old methods. It worked. It had always worked. Meanwhile, an entirely different problem was unfolding on land. Not how far you could go, but how much you could bring with you. A person can carry maybe 40 to 60 pounds before their own body starts working against them. You could walk 20 miles. You could not walk 20 miles hauling a few hundred pounds of meat from a successful hunt. The first fix was almost embarrassingly simple. Drag it. Throw the carcass onto a hide and pull. Archaeologists can actually identify this in the wear patterns left on ancient hides, the specific scuffing that only shows up when something heavy has been dragged a long distance. Then came a smarter version, 2 long poles lashed into a V shape, a platform slung between them. One end dragged along the ground, while the other carries the load. This spread the weight out enough that a single person could suddenly move 100 pounds or more with far less strain. Almost none of these survive in the archaeological record because wooden hides simply don't last. The main reason we know the design existed at all is that people were still using nearly identical versions of it centuries later, when Europeans first arrived in parts of the Americas. The real leap, though, wasn't a tool, it was a partnership. Roughly 15,000 years ago, humans domesticated dogs, and one of the earliest jobs we handed them was hauling. In Arctic regions, dog teams pulled sleds across ice and snow, a handful of animals capable of moving an entire camp's worth of belongings. Then came something bigger, around 5,500 years ago, on the steppes of what's now Kazakhstan. Evidence from a culture called the Botai shows humans had begun controlling horses. Wear marks from bits on horse teeth, traces of mare's milk baked into ancient pottery. These weren't people hunting horses for meat. They were riding them, milking them, restructuring daily life around them. And that single shift collapsed distance in a way nothing before it had. A person on foot moves at roughly 4 miles an hour. A person on horseback can hit 30. In one generation, the effective size of the known world shrank by a factor of 8. Messages traveled faster, trade routes stretched further, warfare changed permanently, because now an army could arrive before anyone even knew it was coming. But even horses couldn't solve one problem. They could carry people much faster, but they still couldn't move enormous amounts of cargo efficiently. That solution came from an invention most people assume arrived first. Strangely, the wheel, the invention that feels like it should have come first, arrived almost dead last. The oldest known wheel, found in Slovenia, dates to only around 5,200 years ago. meaning boats predate it by tens of thousands of years and horses by centuries. The very first wheels weren't even for travel, they were for pottery, a spinning disc for shaping clay. At some point, someone tipped that disc onto its side and asked what would happen if you put something on top of it. Early wheeled carts were heavy, solid wood, prone to cracking, easily bogged down in mud. A horse without a cart was often faster than a horse pulling one. It took the invention of the spoked wheel, lighter and far stronger, to change that math and eventually roads, with one of the earliest paved routes appearing in the ancient city of Ur. Once wheels, roads, and domesticated animals were all working together, something genuinely new became possible. Armies and supplies moving hundreds of miles without collapsing, trade networks stretching across entire regions, the basic infrastructure underneath every empire that came after. Every one of these breakthroughs took thousands of years, and every single one was built directly on top of the one before it. Nobody solved distance all at once. It came apart piece by piece. A spring in the arch of a foot, a floating log that didn't sink, a star memorized in sequence, a wheel tipped on its side out of curiosity. You will get in a car today, or a train, or a plane, and you will complain at some point that it's taking too long. Somewhere behind you, going back further than you can really picture, is a line of people who walked barefoot across entire continents they had no name for, who pushed a canoe out past the last visible edge of land with no idea what, if anything, was waiting on the other side. They didn't know where they were going. They went anyway.